As mentioned in my opening remarks, one of the ways in which we are looking at urban systems is in relation to platform systems. Platforms as a kind of urban scale system by which a certain set of rules or protocols are put into place on which other kinds of things can grow. Correspondent to this is in research has been, as mentioned, an interest in AI at landscape scale, particularly automation. And in this, we think of AI not as just as a kind of synthetic algorithmic force that sits on top of a natural biological given, but rather is something that can be very closely interwoven with the ground on which it sits. We're also interested, we've also been investigating and sort of framing this question of AI not as a kind of machine that has all of the answers, that if you simply would perfect this oracle, that its output would consolidate the mysteries into a singular response. But it's something that's interesting and valuable as a technology, as an epistemological technology, because of its adversarial quality, because it is a form of mineral intelligence that sees the world differently, that is able to sense the world differently, and because of that, it's something with which we can, in turn, compose the world differently, including the parts of the world that we eat, the parts of the world that in our literal ingestion become us. So in this case, the landscape scale phenomenon that we're working with is agriculture, is the deliberate planning, structuring, and sourcing of landscapes that would, in fact, become part of our own process, our own biology. And in this, besides indexing the raw versus the cooked, and thereby nature versus culture, food, quote unquote, suggests all kinds of juicy philosophical complexities as the matter that becomes us. Sorry, I had to. So defined in this way, yeah, then food is the world that we ingest, making it a special category of things, even if its chemistry is not shared by what is not food. The distinction then is based not only on how mammal physiology draws nutrition from some things and not other things, but also on conceptual and conventional distinctions as well. That said, we don't only eat matter that is nutritious. We also drink poisons all the time. We swallow much that our bodies filter out as unsuitable, and in fact, special organs have appeared and evolved to manage exactly this. So in this spirit, we suggest that the term factory farming should be rescued from its current connotations, and that in the mass cultivation of raw materials, we need sources of food that make wasteful means obsolete, with an eye towards forms of ecological restoration at scale, which may mean bringing the landscapes indoors. And in this case, it's landscapes that think about landscapes that we ingest. And so, as you'll see in this project, that AIs that supervise those landscapes, that grow the food that we eat, in turn, the AI are, in essence, also growing us. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Ivan. I am a technologist focused on augmented and virtual reality from Yekaterinburg.
I'm Liudmila Savelyeva, artist and photographer from Moscow.
I'm Paul Van Herk. I'm an architect from Melbourne, Australia.
I'm Thomas Grogan. I'm an artist from London. Our project is called Tuda, which can be translated back and forth, but not only. Over the past week, we've been interested in the link between landscape design and food consumption through the eye of artificial intelligence and the role it can play within this interplay. We will present two videos, one a documentation of a research and the other one a design proposal.
Please enjoy. Food has always terraformed, and landscapes have always created recipes. As instruments of this feedback, humans have been making active correlations between ingredients and terrain for millennia, shaping landscapes to live in and shadow landscapes to feed from. These landscapes overlap in what Europeans still call the countryside. We began this project by asking how the ritual acts of eating and shaping landscapes can be put in a more explicit interplay to the benefit of both. We first visited an agri-tourism operation near Moscow that builds pleasant and productive landforms together. We discovered that it was unprofitable and fantastically inefficient at both, very difficult to picture at platform scale. Platforms already do food. IBM's Chef Watson is an AI that produces quirky recipes based on patterns of ingredients that tend to appear together in its dataset of dishes. Pairing companies like Deliveroo link establishments to individuals. Blue Apron penetrates further into the private domain, delivering ingredients and recipes to dormant kitchens and podcasts. They pitch a more direct connection between food manufacturers and urban eaters, but at the same time, retain the integrity of recognizable ingredients and the aesthetics of provenance. We were fascinated by their bucolic and Puritan representations of source and site, best exemplified in the slogan, "Food is better when you start from scratch." The history of Russian agriculture teaches us that there will be no starting from scratch. Our research took us through the Stolypin reforms that privatized feudal land holdings and led to the Bolshevik Revolution. We visited the Soviet 5-year plans that forced predetermined reaping patterns on the Russian landscape and led to mass starvation. In a meeting with the Minister for Agriculture of Moscow region, we learned about current government incentives to develop vast abandoned growing sites surprisingly close to the city and still very cheap. Low capital investment monocultures are still standard practice in Russia, just like in other landed states. Wheat, meat, and dairy. The sanctions of 2014 put pressure on the foreign supply of fresh fruit and vegetables, which hold a special luxuriant status in Russia. The following year, a 31-hectare greenhouse complex was built on the outskirts of Moscow at a cost of $500 million. The cucumbers within it grow quickly and predictably. They are monitored intensively around the clock and throughout all seasons. Agricultural interiors such as these are becoming standard fixtures of European landscapes. The lingering conflation of nature and agriculture has been a disaster for both, and their separation must be completed for the sake of other remaining ecosystems. The energy intensiveness of bringing crops indoors may be justifiable if they are located close to sites of consumption, and the intensity of their outputs is dialed right up. The trophic cascades of forests and the backyard growing movements that mimic them work too slowly and at too small a scale to be of much help to us. But if new ecosystems can be synthesized indoors, they do not have to follow the same steps, rules, and pace. If new ecosystems are synthesized, then so should their products be. Our attachment to the consistent identities of what we eat is so strong that entire biomes have been demolished for it. We are proposing bounded landscapes that are sensed and expressed by an AI that manages their intensity and complexity. Artificial intelligence is already widely used in agriculture, mostly for tracking and monitoring. Machine vision is used to identify defects and diseases in plants 24 hours a day. It can determine when a goat is ready to mate from the way it walks when it goes to be milked. Soil sensors measure chemistry, water content, and acidity. Robotics are used to weed and plant and pick produce. IoT devices already address boxes and crates. Location trackers are tinier than ever. It is a very small step to imagine the management of whole sites by AI systems that index the growth, interaction, and formation of multiple hybrid species at once. This slightly echoes the permaculture principles of companion planting and food forests, but at a much faster pace, and with much stranger outputs. AI that senses a landscape must also express that landscape's propensity for experimentation. It may be the human taste for predictability and equilibrium that destroys ecologies. Taste, after all, eats itself. The name of this project is Tuda Syuda, which means back and forth in Russian. It has slightly dirty, hustling connotations. It represents the central idea of two AIs that negotiate food and landscape priorities between them. In testing the conversations they might have, we started to see an undeniably social interaction form, stripped of culture and relentlessly cooperative. For example, if one proposes the addition of something new into their exchange, the other may reject thousands of iterations of it until its own oblique priorities are satisfied. As millions of these negotiations take place in both directions at once, the pace and complexity of cooperation increases geometrically. The AIs do not see the whole picture though, because in isolation or totality, they would approach vanishing points of artificial idiocy. Their dialogue of misunderstanding mimics the experimentation of an ecosystem, the optimization of interrelations, rather than of fixed outcomes. As humans are necessary instruments in the interplay of food and landscape, they must be immersed into the conversation too. Image and speech have become the common ground for testing machine learning outputs, but AI has already proven itself as a master creator of new textures and mistaken identities. Machine-generated textures can express the surface qualities of construction materials and edible substances together. They can be built and ingested on the same plane. Textures have long been an interchange between food and landscape aesthetics, from still life to impressionism to Shutterstock. As an interchange between senses, textures can be understood by touch and taste, as well as sight and sound. For our purposes, texture is a rich and fuzzy interchange that can be juxtaposed against the accountability of natural language processing. The video that follows is the demonstration of an immersive virtual space that is both system diagram and interface. It can be navigated as a three-dimensional time machine that displays the history of the dishes for purchase at one end and their accompanying landscapes at the other. In the middle are the textures of the negotiation between them. The interface becomes the decor for new dining rituals that take place in the display of their own effects, products, and origins, an augmented reality in a meaningful sense.
Tuda Syuda is a platform that generates new forms of food and agricultural landscape simultaneously. At its center are two artificial intelligence systems that are in constant negotiation with each other. They are called Chef and Farmer. Chef is constantly experimenting with new ingredients and inventing new dishes for human consumption. Chef registers and predicts the probable tastes of human users as they move through the interface looking to order something fresh. Chef sees food as relative qualities, flavor profiles, textures, and colors. Chef is not attached to existing ingredients, traditions, or provenance. The dishes that humans find in the interface usually are not available for long. As each recipe expires, a new one replaces it. The preparation of each dish begins weeks in advance, in a dialogue between recipe and the landscape that generated its strange ingredients. Moscow is surrounded by a belt of underutilized farmland that was abandoned at the end of the Soviet era. This land has a very short growing season and was typically used for milk and meat production. Large government incentives have led to the rapid expansion of semi-automated indoor agriculture at an immense scale. As a periphery of agricultural interiors begins to form around the city, these sites become laboratories for experimenting with the direct feedback of food and landscape. In Tuda, Syuda, these agricultural scale interiors are conceived of as a space of complex and overlapping speciation, rather than singular production line monocrop. These interiors may contain outdoor spaces, yet they are bounded from forest reserves, marshes and wildlife corridors. Through Farmer, each site develops its own organizational logic and codependencies. Some contain recreation and therapeutic uses for humans. Just like Chef, Farmer needs humans to terraform. The sites are built and reshaped by administrators, who read Farmer's outputs. Farmer use intricate sensing apparatuses to log data ranging from soil pH and companion adjacencies to individual produce tracking. Farmer therefore understands food products very differently to how Chef understands them, because Chef is sensitive to human taste, texture and color. Over time, Chef and Farmer develop correlational understandings of what things are to each other. They make their exchange in relative qualities of foodness and landscapeness. In a dialogue of requests, suggestion and rejection, Farmer suggests new ingredients for Chef, and Chef suggests new arrangements for Farmer. Their separation is key. It introduces checks and balances of both sides of the experimentation. An ingredient that is not advantageous to a landscape will not be produced, nor will a landscape that is not palatable. If one rejects the suggestion of the other must suggest again and again and again. They do not tire of this, their ability to cooperate is beyond any human institution. When the human users select a dish, they are presented with the archive of the conversation that produces it. These become an ingredient list with condensed history beyond mere chemistry. As eating events are constructed around the dish by humans, their terraforming consequences are made immersive. In time and in space. The experimental tendencies of Earth, ecologists and taste-making are drawn even more in alignment. Bit by bit. Back and forth.